Welcome to Ordo Militaris Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. And we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today we're going to talk about the news that was secretly emailed to those who sign up for an email newsletter from the Vatican that Pope Francis personally sacked Bishop Strickland of Brother Alexis Bugnolo.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. We're talking about Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, which is a diocese in northeast Texas. And on the 11th, it was announced by Vatican News, first in their email list, they eventually did put it on their web, that Pope Francis had forcibly removed him. So this has caused a huge explosion of controversy around the world. There's now more than 200 news articles you can find just on Google about this, and from all different points of view, articles are coming out, and priests are talking about it, and the laity are talking about it. It's if Pope Francis thought he was going to solve problems, he's just, caused the whole volcano of discontent with his papacy to erupt in the church.
So, back when you were doing the real election of Pope Francis was back in January. After that, he seemed to be acting, pretty Catholic. And all of a sudden, Bill Clinton, Alex Soros, and others met with him. Then he decided to revert back to his old self. What do you think they told him?
I don't know what they told him, but that was a very strange meeting. And yes, it was at the beginning of July. I don't know if you can find the exact date of their meeting, that some of the three worst characters on the face of the planet came and visited Pope Francis. And after that, he went back to his old ways, so what did they do together? They have a black mass together, or they promised him money, or they said he's not doing what he needs to do. They're obviously his handlers. I mean, he was put into power while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. At least she prepared for it. And to have Soros, Rothschild, and Clinton in the same room with anyone is highly satanic and diabolic as it is. So, does he have psychological problems that he needs to attack people? Or I don't think that's the case. I think he had a grace from God when he was validly elected, and that covered over a lot of his bad faults. But he's just turned his back on the grace of God. Now, Christ prays for the Pope. He says, "I prayed for thee, Peter, that faith may not fail." He doesn't say, "I pray for thee, Peter, so that your faith will never fail." He says, "I pray for you, Peter, that your faith may not fail," which means I'm going to give you the grace, but you got to accept it. And so men can reject the grace of God. There's nothing. The saints don't even say that all the popes are saved. St. Alphonsus said the popes who are not canonized, he presumes are damned. So it's not an office that helps you easily get to heaven. And a lot of popes have held it and have not been canonized. So there's some popes who are really notorious sinners, who were, whether they were fornicators or sodomites or adulterers or killed innocents in war. So.
Why do you think the Vatican decided to do somewhat hide Bishop Strickland's removal by only putting it in an email newsletter?
I think they wanted to mute reaction, and then I think they just see on the 9th of November, Cardinal DiNardo, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United States, presented a letter to Bishop Strickland saying the Pope was asking him to resign, and Strickland refused to resign voluntarily. So on the 10th, that got back to the Vatican, and Pope Francis, if he wanted to get rid of him, was forced to sign a decree to remove him. But there was no cause to remove him. So to publish that on the 11th, the Feast of St. Martin, It was really inopportune from many things. First, it was a Saturday, so maybe he's trying to hide the news. Second, St. Martin was a great, honest, holy bishop. And to remove a famous, honest, holy bishop in our own day on that feast day is just like so, discontent, such a disconnect. So I think it was a last-minute decision. They had to get the news out somehow. They couldn't just put it on the web. If it was said, they had to put it somewhere. But within minutes, I mean, I got notice like 11 minutes after it was announced, and I'm not on the I'm not on the mailing list of Vatican News. I avoid it for that reason. So it was really hot when it came out. A lot of people were talking about it, and now it's just blown up all around the world. I was at Mass this morning in a church I don't normally go. There was no prayer of the faithful for Pope Francis, but there was a prayer of faithful for Bishop Strickland. So it shows you where Catholic sentiment is leading.
So, why did Strickland just okay, that's it, I'm done?
Okay, so first, the Vatican didn't give a reason for the removal. The most we heard is that the two bishops sent to do the visitation decided that it was not feasible that Strickland remain in authority, which is a communist saying that we can't push our agenda if this guy stays. Now, it's pretty clear that Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, as we've said before, he's a CIA asset. He's recruited by P2. The people who controlled the Vatican Bank under Paul VI are the people who put Bergoglio into power. It's the same crew that was behind John Paul II, though the John Paul II had a reputation for holiness and honesty, though behind the scenes it was just as corrupt, even more corrupt than under Bergoglio. And Bishop Strickland has been, over the last 5-6 years, pushing back at Pope Francis's attempt to ideologically take over the Catholic Church and turn it into a globalist, one world religion organization. And that is the goal. That's why Rothschild, Soros, and Clinton were visiting the Pope Francis. They want all the authority, power, influence, legal status, and members of the Catholic Church to change religion and become a Masonic religion, one world religion. And Pope Francis is their tool to get that done, because they believe that Catholics are so stupid that if the Pope says it, we'll do it. And if the Pope or says we should worship Satan, we'll worship Satan. So, because that's their idea of the Catholic religion. It's not the Catholic idea. So in the Catholic Church, justice and truth go together. And when the Pope has a just cause for doing something, no one should argue with him. When the Pope has no just cause to do with them, even St. Robert Baalman, who was a Jesuit, like Pope Francis said, you have the right to resist him. And so Bishop Strickland, he did refuse to resign, but then he did accept that Pope Francis removed him from power. And this is the bizarre thing. He went on, in his interview with John Henry Western, he went on and on about, his personal faith, his devotion, his sense of religiosity, and his filial piety to Pope Francis, and he went on and on about his religious views, but he gave no indication that he was going to resist. And that's the era of pietism, and it's disordered. We'll get into why and how disordered it is, but it's like, how can I say, it's a far worse sin for a man to bend over than for a man to rape the man who's bent over, because there's no natural inclination for a man to bend over and allow himself to be raped. That is totally contrary to everything that is a man and to the human body. He doesn't even have an organ. And he gives the occasion for something to happen. If the child is raped in town by a pedophile, and you know about it after the fact and don't report it, you're complicit. If you know it's going to happen, you don't stop it, you're complicit. And if you're present and you're watching it happen and you don't do anything, that's the worst kind of complicity. Imagine if you were a parent a parent standing and watching that happen would be evil beyond any, universally considered evil. It's the same thing if you're a bishop and you're being unlawfully removed from authority. You are like the parent watching a child being raped. And Pope Francis has already removed a number of bishops from authority with frivolous causes. And just as a pedophile will not be stopped until someone stands up and says no, the people who don't say no are actually committing a worse sin because they're being passive in the face of injustice. And we at Ordo Militaris Catholicus, we're adamant that you have the right to defend yourself, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you.
So, let's begin. What is the Lutheran heresy of Pietism?
Okay, so most people don't know anything about Pietism as an error. Catholics have heard of the virtue piety, which is the virtue of faithful and religious devotion to a superior or to a religious authority. So we should have filial piety towards our parents. We should have religious piety towards Christ, God the Father, the Holy Spirit, the sacraments, Our Lady, any sacred images. We should have, and we should cultivate a spirit of piety in our lives by frequently invoking God, saying prayers, carrying religious symbols on ourselves, and putting sacred art in our houses. And if you enter a Catholic house that has lots of those things, you say, well, this is a pious Catholic. And that's a good virtue. But that's not pietism. Pietism has its own particular history, and it is a fake virtue, which is a vice posing as a virtue. So you have to go back to the history of the Reformation. Martin Luther, he started the Reformation. He was a Benedict. He was an Augustinian monk. He was abbot of like 12 monasteries, but he wanted to become a bishop. He went to Rome. They didn't give him a bishopric, so he decided to break from the Catholic Church and make himself a religious leader in Europe. And most of the nobility of northern Germany followed suit, because by breaking with the Catholic Church, they could steal the church lands and become extremely wealthy overnight, and dump their wives and marry new women, because Luther allowed divorce. So the first generation of Lutherans, they were all hypocrites. Everyone knew they were hypocrites. They weren't doing it for religious allegiance, and they certainly weren't pious people, not at all. But about 100 years after, the third generation of Lutherans, who had been told all the lies by Luther and his followers and the reformers, and just sucked it up as this was the true form of Christianity, they started recognizing that their ministers were just totally hypocrites, and there was no Christian life going on in their churches. So they started this movement of pietism. Maybe you can name the founder, AJ.
Yeah, Philip Spinner.
Philip Spinner. And his idea was, let's meet in houses, let's have catechism together, let's say prayers together, let's read scripture together, and let's start living the Christian life in our personal lives, because we're not getting any help from the Lutheran liturgy, okay? And in a way that seems, hey, this is a good movement inspired by the Holy Spirit. I think some liberal theologian might even say that, but that's not the case. And why is that not the case? Lucifer is the father of lies and the murderer of souls, and that's what our Lord calls him in the gospel, the father of lies and a murderer from the beginning. And our Lord ties the word truth and life, lies and murder together very closely, because being truth, God is truth. He wants us to understand that there's an absolute necessity, if you want to live in reality, that you accept the truth about reality. And God the Father sent Jesus Christ to this world to teach us the reality about the world and what is the true purpose of life, which is the reality of life, which is supernatural, not natural. It's not visible, it's the stuff that's invisible. And so there's an absolute connection between truth and life, and a true narrative and life. So if you want the Christian life, you want to grow in Christian life, you can only do that by accepting Christian truth. You can't have piety is not going to help you at all unless it's founded on truth. So the Lutherans, what they did is they tried to acquire holiness based on the lies of Luther. And the pietistic movement in Lutheranism is the one that basically has preserved Lutheranism to us day. Missouri Lutheran Conference is a pietistic organization, and the Lutherans in Germany not so much, but University of Halle they founded. And because without the movement of pietism, there wouldn't be any Lutherans today, because everyone realizes it's absolutely bunk if you think faith alone can save you. Okay, you need works. Luther rejected the Apostle James' teaching. Without works, your faith is dead. And not to mention the sacraments, the whole hierarchical order of the church, the priesthood, and everything of that kind. So you can't acquire holiness if you're going to throw away parts of the gospel. You can't say, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus as a Protestant. If you say, I'm going to remain a Protestant and be a follower of Jesus, you're contradicting yourself. To be a follower of Jesus, you have to stop being a Protestant and join the church Jesus founded, which is the Catholic Church. And if you insist on being a Protestant, you are always insisting on the diabolic satanic principle, and it just negates everything you do. So Pietism went on to do lots of visible works, but it never achieved anything because it's founded on a lie. You cannot acquire life in a narrative based on a lie. And this is a very, very important point for all manners of life. What happened in the recent 4 years? A huge lie was propagated through mass media, politicians, and even the police. And the people who believed that lie died and took substances that are destroying their health or are killing them and their children or making them sterile. Because lies are the cause of death. And those who promote lies are murderers of souls and bodies. Whereas the people who believed the truth rejected the lie, they also rejected the means of murder, and their health is intact. Okay. And we see that in many, many other aspects of life. So in this case, that's what Pietism is, and that's the history of Pietism.
So is Bishop Strickland a pietist?
Bishop Strickland, if he doesn't change 180 degrees on this point in the next week or so, is committing a worse sin of scandal than Pope Francis. Because in the Catholic Church, the Pope has the right to remove a bishop who's doing something wrong, and the bishop must obey. So Filial Pality is you obey your superior, even if you disagree with him, because you're doing wrong, and he has the right to remove you. That's the Catholic Church. The Church of the Antichrist is a pope without any authority removes you from office for no reason, and you accept gladly. And you say, I'm going to pray for him, and I'm being holy by accepting that. That's the Church of the Antichrist. So see, there's totally two different churches here. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, I don't think of even one case in the Middle Ages where a bishop for no reason was removed by a pope. No pope has ever removed a good, honest bishop for no reason. It's never, ever happened. It's just doesn't happen. The only it's contrary to the gospel. It has to have a criminal intent. And that should never be obeyed. Because when you obey that, and when you pretend, you give the pretense to all the world that you're holy and upright because you accepted that, that is evil. That's the evil error of pietism. That is not Catholicism. And I have been watching Bishop Strickland a long time, how he behaves. I knew he was a pietist even before this, and his reaction does not surprise me, because I knew that he suffers from this error, and someone needs to correct him to his face, because this is evil. This is like saying, Father raped me, but I'm going to pray for him, and if he wants me to rape me again, I'm going to go back to the rectory. This is like saying, Father raped your daughter, and well, it's not so much of a trouble. You let her go back to catechism with him. No, it doesn't work that way. There are some things so evil, they must be resisted. And a pope who's not Catholic, who promotes heresies, who promotes apostasies, who protects the worst kind of perverse criminals, like Father Whitnick, asking a good, honest bishop to resign for no reason is the epitome of injustice. You cannot obey that. You cannot recognize it. That's why I say he didn't remove him. He attempted to remove him. And anyone who accepts that is committing evil. It's like saying, I consent to rape. And this is the church equivalent of the rape of a diocese.
So it doesn't shock me that the followers of the SSPX and FSP, bring it into their religious order and whatever, since they're all near northern Germany. But how did this heresy enter the church as a whole? And when do you think it came in and began to take root?
Well, modernism in the Catholic Church also begins in Germany, and it begins among the pietistic Lutherans. And so I think it's the modernists who introduce it, because you cannot advance an evil agenda in the church until you get people to become pacifists and accept being abused while thinking they're being holy. So in the Middle Ages, holiness and militancy went together. The greatest saints, like St. Bernard, who was always in his monastery praying, was the one writing the rules of military orders and calling for crusades. You see this with Blessed Mark Raviano, St. John Capistrano, Blessed Urban II, and all the great saints of the Middle Ages. You wouldn't have run into, not even St. Francis, the saint of peace, not even he was against the crusades. He went on the Fifth Crusade. And the people today who said he was against it are absolute damnable liars. So this is what Catholicism is about. Holiness and militancy go together, because though the war, our spiritual war, is not against flesh and blood, but against demons and principalities in the air, nevertheless, at times it does descend onto flesh and blood, because some men have given themselves up to evil. And no one in the Catholic Church before the French Revolution ever interpreted the gospel differently. Nowadays, we have a complete false gospel, which says, well, you should turn your cheek. Or, if you're persecuted in one town, you should flee to another. So you should never attack back, because that's just not Christian. But that is a twisting of Scripture, because what does our Christ say? He says, if your brother slap you, turn the cheek. If your brother presses you a mile, go with him a second. He says, if your brother, what does that mean? A fellow Christian. So to fellow Christians who are personally offending us, we should reply with passivity and accepting the suffering, because he having a Christian faith is going to see in that we're right and he's wrong. Okay. But Christ never taught that manner of acting for the whole community, or us when we're attacked by unbelievers like Jews and Muslims or godless people. He never said that. Matter of fact, he said to the apostles, now is the hour, sell your cloak and buy your sword. Okay, that was against the high priests and their guards, who were godless people. He said, arm yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if you thought Pope Francis was simply an error and he had never said anything heretical, scandalous, idolatrous, his election was without doubt valid, and he was just like a living saint, and he removed you from your office as bishop, without cause, the proper way of acting would be very respectful and say, Holiness, I think you made an error. I'm not violating any canon. You wouldn't even then accept it. But acting the way Bishop Strickland is acting, that would be appropriate in some case. But Jorge Mirabilio is not such a man. This is a man who had people thrown from planes at 30,000 feet in Argentina. This is a man who concealed the most horrific pedophiles and protected them, and even paid thousands of dollars to have books written to defend them. This is a man who, when he found Eucharistic miracles, hid them away so no one would venerate the sacrament. This is a man who's protected every pedophile and sexual abuser in the Diocese of Buenos Aires and never allowed their names to be revealed. This is a man who's promoted every sort of pervert, heretic, and Marxist to the Vatican and encouraged their teaching of all kinds of errors. This is a man who pushes gay marriage, gay blessings, transgender baptisms. This is a man who sold 20 million people of China into slavery to the CCP by giving the Peking authority to name the bishops in the country. I mean, just go on and on. This man is a persecutor of the Latin Mass. This is a man who insults Catholics on a weekly basis. This is a man who's so whacked out, he says it's evil to wear a cassock, but it's okay to rehabilitate a known serial sicko, satanic abuser of women religious. So to react as Bishop Strickland is reacting is totally bizarre and totally abnormal, and it's not Catholic. And that's why I say Bishop Strickland, if he doesn't change, come out and say, I'm going to resist this, he's committed a worse sin than Pope Francis. Because he's given a scandal to the whole church that we should just bend over and let the globalists rape the church. And that's holiness. You know, holiness is letting Satan triumph. That's what he's saying.
Now let's go back into your early years growing up. Back when the CIA began to implement the doctrinal warfare program, when did you notice it became mainstream in the church, pietism, among so-called Catholic politicians and talking heads of the day?
I was born during the council, and the first thing I noticed as a little boy was that they wanted us to receive communion in the hand. And no one could believe the priest was even preaching this. They were like, and he explained how to do it and things like that. And then he said, well, you can now receive in the hand. The Pope has authorized it, or the Bishop has authorized it. This was at St. Anthony of Padua Parish in Providence, the Diocese of Providence, Rhode Island. No one received in the hand that Sunday. The next Sunday, 1 or 2, 3 people. The Sunday after that, a few more people. But people were so shocked, they were like, because in our church we had a Eucharistic railing. Everyone knelt down, received on the tongue. We always had done that way. It's with that I started seeing the rise of pietism, because as the liturgy was disassembled and you could no longer pray during Mass, Mass became a distraction, a social hour, or a political harangue, a get-together, a musical. Catholics had to compensate. Where were you going to find devotions? When I was a little boy, my mother took me to Stations of the Cross, the Rosary, the 7 Words of Christ on Good Friday. There were things to do at church. Exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, Holy Hour. They slowly faded away. So what did Catholics have to do? They had to start rosary organizations, have moved the image of Our Lady from house to house. They had to organize pilgrimages together, which they go in a bus to something, and not really even a religious sort of thing. They had to start taking up booklets of prayer and saying them at home, the St. Bridget prayers or something, or they have these chain letter prayers, or they started following all these apparitions from here and there and stuff like that. And they're compensating for not having it at the liturgy. And this is pietism, because that's not where your piety is supposed to be. Your piety is supposed to be at the holy sacrifice of the Mass and directed towards God. It's not supposed to be in your house with a side altar with Our Lady, although that's good. I'm not saying it's bad. But don't think you're holy if you have all the pious things at house, and out in your daily life there's no religion, and at church you just endure no liturgy. You're not being holy, because you are trying. What you're saying by your life is that holiness can be divorced from militancy, and that's evil, and that's not Christianity. Okay, that's exactly what Satan wants us to think. That's called pacifism, spiritual pacifism.
We get to our modern days, we see the new crop of talking heads, Boris, Parrot, everybody. Promote pietism for all sorts of causes, including the recent pro-life defeat in Ohio, the so-called defense of the statue of St. Louis King IX. We see it constantly. They say, do nothing but pray for current government leaders who won't change, and then attack us. and we start up new political parties that will stop the problems.
Yeah, so the worst form of pietism is when you attack militant Catholics, or you don't even talk about them. You try to censor them out of the church, because that's what I call militant pietism, and that's extremely evil. A classic case of a pietist, John Henry Weston, LifeSite News. He begins all his interviews, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, our Father, who art in heaven. And then when he's done with his prayer, he pushes his, you accept evil, and it's evil. There's evil out there, and that's bad, but you should just accept it and do nothing. And that because he's a grifter. All Catholic grifters are pietists, because they have to put on the airs of religion, whether they're giving you a CCD program or any kind of thing, but they can't actually tell you to solve a problem, because then they would have to move out of just give me, I'm important, I'm holy, by doing nothing, to get you to actually do something, and then maybe your money wouldn't go to them. Okay. So this is why Protestant preachers are also involved in pietism. It's Christian grifting. That's what it is, grifting on the Christian religion. You don't find a single saint in the Middle Ages would be like, it's horrible what they're doing in the Holy Land. They're killing Christians. They won't let us pilgrimage anymore. And this is absolutely intolerable. And if you think I'm right, give me some money so I can go to the next town and say the same thing. In the Middle Ages, people were sane enough to say, we didn't have the word grifter, but they say you're an absolute fraudster. Why don't you go to the Holy Land and do something about it? Okay. These people will never do anything. I mean, they don't even raise money for the poor. They didn't even take a collection for any Christians murdered, killed, or sent as refugees of war in the Ukraine, Lebanon, Armenia, Iraq. They never did a blessed thing, because they're pietists. They're pretending to be holy when they're actually wicked. They're living a lie.
I could see him in Ukraine when the air raid signs go off.
They wouldn't even endure it. I was in the Ukraine. Missiles were blowing up 1,000 feet where I lived. Okay. So, and I wasn't afraid, because I knew I was there to do God's work. When I'm not a pietist, I never was a pietist. Cradle Catholics tend not to be pietists unless we're led astray by someone who is. And all these grifters all these Catholic media grifters, many of them are Jewish descent or converts. They're not serious Catholics.
Yeah. So get to that next question. When the ordinary Catholics led astray, how come they don't see it's wrong or anything?
Okay, so there's a whole cacophony of voices now after the attempted removal of Bishop of Tyler, who are saying it's wrong, but you must accept it. I mean, they're all coming out of the woodwork saying you're a sedevacantist if you don't accept injustice in the church, you're a heretic, you're unfaithful, you're opposing the office of Peter, you're going to be destroyed by God because you are opposing Peter, and all kinds of absolute blasphemous statements. That, these people who would never quote the fact that Peter is the rock because they deny all Catholic teaching, all of a sudden I'm quoting Peter is the rock if you don't accept Bishop Tyler's removal. And there's people in the Diocese of Taylor Marshall, what's he saying? Go and see what he's saying. If he's not saying let's have a rally, let's tell the bishop to stay in power, and let's block the cathedral so this new bishop can't get in, he's a complete fake, and he's a grifter too, and he's a pietist. And I imagine that's what he's going to say. I'm not saying that. I'm not going to say that's what he's saying, but I know Taylor Marshall. That's the game he plays. He's a convert too. He's not a Catholic, so he was Anglican. We got to act in an entirely different way. We have to be even more militant, because if parents are allowing their children to be raped by priests, someone has to go out there and end it. Okay, so to use a real case example, back in the 70s in New Bedford, there was a priest who raped a boy. When the father found out about it, he went up to the parish with his shotgun. He knocked on the door. The priest wouldn't come out. He blew that door to pieces. That night, the priest fled and was never seen again. He wasn't murdered by the priest, but the fear of God came into him, and he left the priesthood and he got out of town. So that father protected dozens, maybe hundreds of children. And fathers who don't act that way, you're complicit. Okay. Not saying you use a gun and shoot a door, but you have to stop injustice when it is done by evil people. This is not a question of they offended me. And I mean, Pope Francis hasn't offended any of us here listening to this program by removing Bishop Tyler. But as Catholics, we're obliged to oppose injustice in the church, and we have to act.
That comes to what my relative did a long time ago. The Council of Sutri.
Council of Sutri. So, there have been bad times in the church. Before, there was a time when there were 3 men who claimed to be Pope. One was a young man who was 19 years old who raped any man or woman who got in his sight. That was Benedict IX, Pope Benedict IX. One was the Bishop of Tusculum that just felt, you know, this guy's totally intolerable. I'm going to go to Rome and get myself declared Pope because I'm an honest, upright man. That was Sylvester III, Pope Sylvester III, anti-Pope. Okay. Benedict IX was a true Pope. Then there was Gregory VI. He was like, this guy's such a whoremonger. I gotta convince him to leave office. I'll pay him a bribe. He'll resign, and I'll buy the papacy from him. That was Gregory VI. And Gregory VI was otherwise a rather upright, just man. So one of your family members, Henry III, German king, he wanted to become emperor, and so he had to be crowned by the Pope at Rome. Except there were these 3 guys at Rome, and your ancestor had some self-respect. He wasn't going to let any of these 3 people put his hands on his head and crown him. So he summoned the bishops of Lazio and the clergy of Rome to Sutri, Italy, and they all sat down, and each of these guys was asked to explain why he thought he was the Pope. And the first was Sylvester III, and he just admitted he just came to Rome, declared himself Pope, and paid some clergy to elect him. So he was put under arrest, and he was dragged off to a monastery and locked up for the rest of his life as a usurper. He had stolen the office of the papacy, and he admitted to doing it, though otherwise he was an upright man. Then there was Gregory VI, who admitted he bought the papacy from this guy. We're not too clear whether he paid him first to resign and then bought the papacy, or he bought the papacy and then the guy resigned. But Henry III wasn't going to have anything to do with that, and he told him, you got to resign, otherwise we're going to remove you from the papacy. Gregory VI voluntarily resigned from the papacy. And his acolyte was Saint Hildebrand, who goes on to become Saint Gregory VII. So, I mean, there were 2 saints in the room. The Blessed Victor III was also there, who was abbot of Monte Cassino, would later become Pope 20 years from then. And then so that cleared the way. There was no more claim. Oh, then there was Benedict IX. He didn't come to the council. He wasn't going to listen to the imperial summons or to the summons of Gregory VI. So the council declared him contumacious and deposed him from the papacy, saying, you've already sold it. You can't come back and claim it anymore. Okay. So then there was no Pope. And Henry, this was December 21st. And Henry wanted to be crowned on Christmas Day and get back to Germany. So they all got together, and in the crypt of the Cathedral of Sutri, there's a monument there, they elected the Bishop of Bamberg, Clement II, who was the private chaplain of Henry III. He was the only bishop around he could trust. It wasn't, really strange or total crook. And the next day at the Vatican, he was elected by the clergy of Rome as successor of St. Peter, and on Christmas Day, he crowned Henry III, Emperor of the Romans. And in this one case, we see that militancy, truth, justice, and law were perfectly united. You had laity, clergy, and religious all acting together, everyone accepting there has to be a rule of law, there has to be honesty, there has to be justice. We have to protect the reputation of the papacy, or we're going to be all stained by, corruption. And no one hesitated. Now, maybe it had something to do with a few thousand German soldiers all gathered around the assembly, but I think it was just the common sense. This situation is intolerable. It has to come to an end. And this is the proper Catholic attitude. You didn't have anyone there saying, no, we have to accept injustice. You didn't have the council father saying, we can't declare Benedict IX contumacious. He was validly elected. No, it didn't work that way. People knew that dishonesty has no rights, and falsehood has no rights, and injustice has no rights. And you don't respect criminals, usurpers, heretics, apostates, or schismatics. You don't respect them at all, because piety is only shown to your legitimate superior. That's, you never show piety. If you were to show piety to someone who is not your superior, you'd be bizarre. Imagine if the son of a family started treating the father next door as his father. Okay, or the daughter started treating the woman across the street as her mother, even though her mother's there in the house. That'd be just totally bizarre. You wouldn't say, "Oh, that's a very devout and faithful daughter." No, you wouldn't. And you wouldn't say, "That son is holy. He's very obedient to his father," because he's not being obedient to his father. He's being obedient to someone who's not his father. And the Catholic Church has the right to know if the man who is the Pope is Catholic. Is not an adulterer, and not an idolater, and not a schismatic. And I don't think you could prove that with Pope Francis. It's obvious that he is a heretic, a schismatic, and an apostate. It's obvious that he is. And a council is the only one who could decide that. But the bishops of the province of Lazio need to come together and declare it, interview him, interrogate him, and then declare the truth of the matter. And that's what was done at Sutri, and it can be done again, because there's actually canons 441 to 446 talk all about a provincial council, and all the conditions for it to be called have been met. The bishops just need to do it. And so the Catholics of the world need to write these 20 bishops and tell them, this is what needs to be done. This situation is intolerable. If an honest bishop doing everything he should be doing can be removed, then what's the purpose even becoming a bishop anymore? What's the purpose of being honest in the clergy anymore? I mean, how are you going to recruit vocations when honest people can be kicked out for doing what is right? I mean, it's like saying, if you follow all the rules in the football game and get more points than the other guy, you lose. What would happen to the football team? Who would want to play football by those rules? No one. No one, because you're destroying the whole system of merit. You can't say, if you break the rules, you get rewarded, and if you follow the rules, you get demoted. You can't do that. That's the end of society. Any society that accepts that principle ceases to exist. So if we accept that Pope Francis removed the Bishop Tyler, we're basically saying, I accept that the Catholic Church no longer exists. And I will that the Catholic Church no longer exists, and I'm going to let the Catholic Church no longer exist. That's the consequence of this. If Catholics do not react forcefully and insist on a provincial council in the ecclesiastic province of Rome to depose this fraud.
So he's started up the Sutri initiative. What is it?
Okay, so on October 20th, before Bishop Strickland was removed, I went to Sutri and I started this initiative. I explained it all, the canon law. You can come to From Rome. AJ will give you a link. And it's basically saying, dear Bishop, dear faithful, listen to me. This is the only way to solve the problem. It's intolerable. We need to solve the problem. Write each of these bishops an email or a surface letter and tell him to do his duty. I even wrote out the letter you should write to him, explaining it all out canonically and theologically. Very respectful letter. So you don't have to do anything more than send 20 emails or 20 letters. And already the faithful have begun sending emails, letters, or even FedEx letters to these bishops. So they all already have received this petition once, but we need several thousand, tens of thousands, or 100,000 letters in each of these guys' mailboxes, so that they realize that the whole church recognizes that if they don't get rid of this guy, that's the end of the Catholic faith. You might as well just sell your churches, give up your priesthood, and go on and join some other religion, because you can't break the order of merit. Good bishops cannot be removed for doing nothing other than honest, upright things. It can't happen. And anyone who claims to be a pope that does that is a total enemy of God. He's not in communion with the church. It's an act of schism to remove an honest bishop from a diocese for doing nothing wrong. That's schism. That's the worst kind of schism, because there's no motive. I mean, if you're upset with your bishop and you don't like the color he painted the cathedral and you stop attending mass with him and sacraments with him, well, you're committing an act of schism. But at least there's some motive there. But to totally say I'm not going to have anything to do with an honest, upright person, it's obvious you don't agree with the Catholic faith or believe the Catholic faith, because that's the only rational, there has to be rational justification, even if there's no motive. So removing Tyler from Texas is a public declaration by Pope Francis that he is not Catholic. He has publicly declared to the world that he's not Catholic.
So as put in the one show page title, is the Vatican now occupied territory?
If we allow it to be, yes, we have to say it is. And the people in the Vatican, all the bishops and archbishops who are apostolic nuncios, all the monsignors and bishops and archbishops who are incarnate in the Vatican, like Cardinal Burke or Archbishop Bugnolo or Bishop Schneider, Bishop Gracida, Bishop Jan Paul, the Polish bishop, I forget his name. All the bishops who are conservative, Cardinal Muller, they all should be doing something, and it can't just be in private. There has to go public now. There has to be a public call. They need to join the Sutri initiative and ask these bishops to act, because it's you know, if we don't act, we are basically saying to God, I don't give a damn about the Catholic Church, Christ coming down from heaven, or the sacraments, or you just let it all go away. It doesn't matter to me, because as long as I have my pietistic practices in the corner of my bedroom, I'm holy. And that's Satanism.
So everything is in the show page. I'll try to combine the two. We did 2 programs in one show, folks.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. This is a very important topic. We have to avoid the error of pietism, which is spiritual pacifism.
Yeah. So please like and share this program, and go to the Sutri initiative, which is linked in the show page, one of them, and do the letters, emails, do both. If you find a fax number, fax it. Make sure they get it some way. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.